This is John Groves coming to you from my home studio. For today's Bible talk, I'd like to discuss the story I'm referring to as Samuel's Dilemma. In the 8th and later chapters of the first book of Samuel in the Old Testament, we have essentially the story of how Israel became a monarchy. Up to this point in time, Israel has been a tribal confederation, and the key leaders have been judges and priests. At this point, things have gone reasonably well for the Israelites under their then current governance. Samuel has been the chief priest and judge for the people, and he's held in high regard. But now that he's become quite a bit older, he has appointed his sons to also be priests and judges for the people. And they were very much like Eli's sons. They were corrupt and not trustworthy. And so that was a concern for the people. So the elders arrange a meeting with Samuel at his home in Ramah and try to prevail on him to have him appoint a king for them to be like the other nations, and in essence, have the king fight their battles and look after them. Samuel has a lot of misgivings. He prays to the Lord and receives his advice that he is to go forward with their demands, even though it's against his better judgment. And he gives a mouthful as to the consequences of having a king over them and essentially asks them to reconsider. He says the people are going to be heavily taxed to support the monarchy. Their children and servants are all going to be conscripted to serve the king, either in his armies or in his fields, agricultural fields, or in his household as domestic servants. It's going to be a very different enterprise than what they've known to this day. So you can understand how Samuel was caught up in this dilemma. I want to tell them that this is not advisable, but I have checked in with the Lord, and he's telling me to go ahead and let them have the way. And so what are we to make of it? One very interesting observance that the narrator shares with us is that Samuel is told, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting your advice. Learn to distinguish between these two aspects. So we'll be coming back to that. It is essentially a 13th century hand-copied or illustration, hand-painted for a hand-copied Bible. This was, I think, presented to King Louis IX, and essentially is in a high Gothic style. You can see how the artist has made use of familiar figures, tried to embellish the appearance of his figures. On the left side of the panel, you see the elders of Israel approaching Samuel and asking him to appoint a king. He listens to them. In the right-hand side of the panel, you see Samuel anointing Saul, who is depicted as a very tall and handsome individual. And then at the far right, you have Saul's servant, who, according to the story, has been instructed to go on ahead of them, ahead of Samuel and Saul, for what essentially will be a private anointing. Later, there's to be a more public ceremony for the installation of Saul as king. But this is a basic story, and this is the top half of one folio illustration and book. Now, since we're running out of time, we'll have to close things off and say that we'll discuss the questions of Samuel's integrity and the wisdom of going forward with kingship as a model of governance for the people of Israel in this day and time. Until then, we will end our session. Thank you.